Hey guys, it's Rachel with Restorations by Rachel, and here's my piece this week. I'm really excited about it. I don't know if you guys like finding a good deal, like I love finding a good deal, but I got this for only $50 on the estate sale. It's made by Dixie Furniture, so it's a really great piece, vintage piece. It did come with a mirror, and I've actually already sold that for 25 bucks, so I'm only in $25 on this dresser, which is a really great start. I originally thought I might change it up more than I think I am now, because the more I looked at this hardware, I just love the detail of it. It's beauty. And I first thought I was probably going to take this off, but I did put a pull up on my Instagram, and most of my followers agreed with me that to keep this. So to me, this kind of like gives Bridgerton vibes, and I am planning to kind of run with that theme, and I'm excited to get going on it. So let's go.
First step before cleaning is to remove the hardware. I always store it in a plastic bag so I know where it is and that it stays all together.
Since the hardware is removed now, you wouldn't want to close this because then it's hard to open. So my solution to that is I just use these long screws. You can see that I've used them a lot before. There's paint on them. And I'll just tape over the back and open and close them. And then I'll tape over the back side of this so when I'm painting, there won't be any overspray inside.
To remove the fake keyhole hardware, I use my paint scraper to get under there. It has this nice kind of gradual edge to it. And so just use my hammer to slowly get under there. I wanted to go very slowly just because I didn't want to cause any damage to the drawer front that I would then have to come back and fix. There was a little bit of, I wouldn't call it ghosting, but just some imprints from the hardware that I will have to fill and just fill in the holes from the tack nails since I'm not going to reuse this center hardware. But I just felt like it was worth the time to go a little bit more cautiously so I didn't make more work for myself with repairs.
Before beginning any repairs or sanding, I got to give it a good cleaning to get all this dust, dirt, grime from who knows how long, how many years off of here, so I don't grind that down into the dresser itself, because that could cause adherence issues. So before I get to sanding, I want to go ahead and make some repairs. I'm going to go ahead and fill in where I'm not going to replace this hardware. And then there's some damage to the corner here. I've already taped it off to kind of create a good form. And then I'm going to use this. It's the same as Bondo. That's what I typically use, but the store was out of Bondo when I went. So it's by JB Weld. It's just a 2-part epoxy. You have the putty, and then you add this hardener to it. And so I will get to filling it in. You do need to work pretty quickly, so I'll probably mix a little bit, work until it starts to get hard, because it'll start hardening in about 90 seconds. Typically, I feel like the work time I have. And then I can create more patches of it if I need to.
Next up is a lot of scuff sanding. Now this is a very key part of the process because you want your paint to stick. And I'm starting on the top, and since the top is laminate, I need to make sure I get it really scuffed up. I'm using an 80 grit sandpaper. That's going to help get rid of that slick, shiny surface so my primer will adhere. I've done several dressers with this same type of laminate top, and using 80 grit on there works like a charm. While I was sanding, the Bondo had plenty of time to dry, so now it's time to take care of those areas that I fixed. I started with the corner first, and I'm just going along each side trying to create that 90-degree angle with my sander. I'm using 120 grit on my sander now, switched over to that because the 80 would just be a little too coarse. Usually with fixes like this, it's going to be 2 rounds with Bondo and then sanding it back to make sure it's flush with everything around it. For a lot of the rest of the flat areas, I use 180 grit sandpaper on my Surf Prep sander. You can see this is an orbital sanding disc I'm using, and I do this a lot now because I really love these discs and they stick just fine on there. So, do what works. Okay, so it's a new day for me. I got most of the flat surfaces sanded yesterday. I have these drawers out still. I'll have a little bit more of that, and then I need to get into the curved areas of the drawers. I will use my Proform
the foam sanding pad from my surf prep sander, and then I'm gonna go, just for extra insurance before I put primer on, I will put some liquid sand deglosser in those areas so that my primer sticks really well. So I'm hoping I can get this done in an hour. I don't know, I'm trying to like be off my phone and just stay focused. So let me see if I can do that, and we'll see.
For the rest of the flat surfaces where it worked well, I switched to my orbital sander because, like I said, I was in a bit of a time crunch. I was headed to meet a friend for lunch, and I needed to get this done so I could get primer on.
Okay, I may have been a bit overzealous because I'm already 30 minutes in and I just finished getting the flat areas. I need to do all the curved areas of the drawers and the dresser, but it's okay. I'm trying to go as fast as I can, but also still do a good job.
Before I put the drawers back in, I'm going in with my vacuum to get out all the dust and dirt that is often trapped in these dressers, especially older ones. This one wasn't too bad, but still had plenty of dust, so I would always recommend doing this. And then I'm going to take that same medium grit foam pad and get all the contoured areas on the base of the dresser.
Well, I didn't quite hit my hour goal, but I got it an hour and 10 minutes, which is not too bad. So I am going to now go over it with a vacuum and then wipe it down really well to make sure all that dust is off before I go in with the deglosser in these areas for my added insurance. And then I'll do a little prep so I protect the drawers from overspray, and then I'll be able to prime.
One last thing I'll do is also just go over it lightly with a tack cloth. And I totally understand if you think this is a bit much, but I just don't want to get burned. Okay, exciting part. We are starting to get paint on this dresser. I am using Kiehl's Restoration Primer. It's one I've used on quite a bit of projects and have loved. It's water-based, so easy cleanup. And I think it's about $50 for the gallon, which is pretty economical with how many projects I've already used it on, and I still have, I think, about a quarter of it left. And I always water it down a bit because primer is pretty thick for a sprayer to spray out. I just have for my sprayer, I have the turbine blowing at about a 5 or a 6 typically, and then I have the flow pretty open, so it's putting out a pretty good amount of product. It's also very important that you strain your primer, especially if it's a can that you've already opened. That same goes for paint, and it's always good to do some practice sprays before you then go put it on your actual dresser. I just have some extra pieces of cardboard that I have on hand that I use. So this is why you check for proper adhesion. Looks like I only have trouble on these two drawer fronts, and then that one I haven't really scratched anymore. It's just, well, once I dig in there a little bit I can get more. So I will sand that back, do some extra sanding there, and then I have some caulking I want to do in some of these seams to make that look a bit more seamless, if I can spit that out. And I mean, because you can see here where it's like puddling up. I don't want that look. So putting caulk through here will help make that just look a whole lot better. To sand back these areas, since they are so contoured, I'm using a foam sanding pad. It's 120 grit. That's going to help me get off of this primer that's flaking off, and then also kind of scuff sand the area where apparently I didn't do a good enough job. And I did apply that deglazer, of course, that you saw me, but I may have not applied as much there. Who knows? But, you know, this happens, and thankfully it was a pretty easy fix. I'm just sanding it back to where it's pretty smooth, and then my next coat of primer should take care of it. This is also the time where I can fill in some areas that I missed before priming. Here there are some indentations from the hardware that I've removed and I'm not going to replace or put back there. So I'm using Bondo Spot and Glazing Putty. It is fantastic for shallow scratches, holes, anything like that. So that's what I'm going over this area in. For caulk, I'm
Or
using DAP that's paintable within 20 minutes. So this is one that I love. And I've been using this tube for several projects. You can see kind of the hardened goop came out when I was trying to press it out. I thought I'd gotten it all before starting to put it on the drawer front, but obviously not. So I had to clean that up a little bit, but it was easy to do just with my finger. And then I have a wet paper towel in my other hand that I've used to dampen my finger, and then I'll just wipe across there. Some people use baby wipes, or you could use a wet paper towel, but I don't think it makes quite as smooth of a pass as my finger does, so that's what I do. I then also filled in the sides and any gaps at the corner seams that I thought were too wide. To smooth out the areas where I applied the glazing putty, I am using 180 grit on a handheld sanding tool. I really like this. It's pretty convenient to use with my orbital sanding disc, and I just have my vacuum going there next to it to help with dust collection. To smooth out the rest of the body, I'm just using this 400 grit sanding pad. I love these things. They are nice and pliable, but then also at the same time they sand well, because sometimes if it's too squishy, it's not going to sand very well. So I feel like it's a good mixture of both. After all that was done, it was time for a second coat of primer.
all right, so good news, bad news. Good news is the primer is now adhering to these areas that it wasn't the first time. Bad news, we had a pretty strong thunderstorm come through yesterday right after I'd sprayed this. And I think all the moisture in the air caused a ton of inverted bubbles on the top of the dresser. So now I'm going to have to sand that smooth. And I don't know if I'll have to still put another coat of primer on or not, because that first coat of primer, I almost didn't put another coat of primer on the top when I did the second coat everywhere, because I felt like it was sufficient. But I just was like, you know what, I'm going ahead and spraying. I'll just go ahead and put it on there. So unfortunately, that bit me in the booty, but it's okay. And then second update. So I remember, if you remember, originally I said this was giving me Bridgerton vibes. And I was thinking I was going to go with a light blue and was really excited about that vision. However, a friend, like my oldest daughter's friend, is getting a new bedroom furniture for her 13th birthday. Her mom had contacted me a while back about doing a set for her, and they both love this dresser. Don't have a matching nightstand to go with it, unfortunately, but they still want to go with it. But they want more of like a neutral, like a creamy color, because she has a desk in her room that is already a creamy white. And so they liked the color fauna that I used on the French Provincial set. And so that's what I'm going to be doing with this. So I thankfully had already ordered some more. And so it came in the mail today. And I'm going to smooth this out and do some scuff sanding around, smooth everything out, and then get to painting.
I also noticed some little areas along the edge that need to be filled, so the glazing putty was perfect for that. So I filled those in, and it dries rather quickly, so within 10 minutes you can sand it back. I started out using a 220 grit for sanding back the primer. It gummed up pretty quickly. I was having to use this little rubber type thing that I got to help clean sandpaper, so that was really helpful. But if anybody has any other tips or tricks for sanding back primer in this type of scenario without it gumming up your sanding disc, I would love to know. But maybe it's just is what it is, because that's what it's always done for me. I eventually switched over to 180 grit because the 220 just wasn't quite working, and that was what did the trick. As you can see, several areas were pretty bare, so I had to go over it with one more coat of primer. After smoothing everything out with 400 grit sandpaper and then going over everything with a tack cloth to get up all the dust, it was ready for paint. I'm using Wise Owl's 1 hour enamel paint in the color Fauna. It's a pretty warm neutral, and it was picked by the mom and daughter. The daughter saw it in my French Provincial set and just really loved the color combo, so I'm going to go with this and gold hardware, and I think it's going to look really beautiful. I've honestly struggled a little bit with this last time trying to spray this paint. I didn't have trouble when I sprayed a green color that I had of theirs in Love, but the fauna, it kind of bubbled up on me. I ended up watering it down more, and that was a good solution, and I'm actually going to struggle with that a little bit here, but it otherwise is a really great paint, so it's probably just user errors. Plenty of people who use it don't have a problem with it, but it's very durable. It does not need a top coat, like 100%. I don't feel like it does. It is just so durable and scratch resistant. So it is pricier, but I think it ends up being worth the money just because you're not having to top coat and it has a great finish. I do have it on my list to take this dried to Sherwin-Williams to get it to color match, but we actually recently repainted our exterior of our house, and we used accessible beige in several areas, and it looked really close. So I think that's a pretty close match if you're wanting to just go to your local paint store and get it matched in your favorite furniture paint. Okay, if you're still watching here, you will see me using this little tool to pick out some things. I later find out that unfortunately I had not cleaned out my paint sprayer that well, and there were some dried flecks in the nozzle that was shooting out as I painted. So learn from my mistake. Clean out the nozzle of your paint gun well.
So the coat of paint dried, and I'm having a similar issue as I had last time when I used this paint. I have some bubbling show up on it as it dried, and you probably hear lots of background noise. Sorry if you do. We're having our roof replaced today. So it's pretty loud. But anyways, last time to fix this, I watered it down more, and it was just like on these like the flat surfaces, not like the vertical surfaces that it showed up as much. So I am not sure like why it would be more this versus the vertical. So if any of y'all have any insight to that, please let me know. Last time I watered it down more, and so I'm hoping that that's going to fix it. So I'm going to smooth out all these bumps. I would do a light sanding with a 400 grit anyways, just to smooth out any little ones that show up, but it's pretty bad as you can see. So I'm going to get that fixed, and then hopefully this next coat of paint will go on better.
It thankfully sanded down pretty well with just this 400 grit sanding pad, and then I touched up areas around the dresser that needed it before putting on the second coat. I did not point out earlier that it wasn't until after the second coat that I thought to check the nozzle in my paint sprayer. I usually just wrap it up, put like a wet paper towel over it, or you can put a plastic baggie over it just to help it stay wet or keep it from drying out in between spraying. But I had not had this happen to me before, so after it happened after the second pass, I was like, okay, what's going on? And you can see here there was a big dried chunk inside. I did thankfully catch an area where there were some paint drips, and then a couple of the drawer fronts, it just wasn't very smooth. There were some ridges there, I think, from where I'd gone to bare wood. So I smoothed all that out before getting another coat of paint on. Okay, now we're down to the final stretch. So I'm just getting the edges of these drawers with a foam brush and paint left over in my paint canister. I usually do 2 to 3 coats. The number of coats just depends on the amount of coverage you get with each coat. It is time for the moment of truth for the aluminum foil. Thankfully, it worked great at protecting the drawers, so I'll definitely be using this method in the future. For the hardware, I did my typical routine of simmering in water and vinegar and then cleaning up with Barkeeper's Friend. It looked great, but that white paint that was on it just wouldn't come off. So I'm covering it with this gold spray paint. It was actually really close to the natural brass color, so I was really happy about that. My typical method is I will spray the backside of the hardware first, so that way if I flip it over and it's not 100% dry, if it gets smudged, it's usually not a part that you see. I will fix it if it's really bad. Always just make a good judgment call there, but then it dries pretty quickly and I'll flip it over and then do 2 to 3 coats on the top. All right, the fun part, looking back at where we started and seeing where we are now. It had good bones. Obviously did not like that old yellow finish. Had a little bit of damage there on the corner, but everything else was in really great shape otherwise. I got a whale of a deal on it, only being $25 net in, that name brand. But after some work and new paint, here it is now. What do you think? I love it, of course. I think the star of the show is the hardware. It's so elegant. It's going to be so pretty in a young girl's room, and I'm just so excited for my daughter's friend to have it. One exciting thing is that we did find the matching nightstand this week, so I'll eventually redo that for her. I probably won't do a video on it, but just a little exciting tidbit. All right, y'all, that wraps it up for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and if you're not already subscribed, I'd love for you to come follow along and join this wonderful community I have here.